Started the company when I was 24. 14 years in, I still feel like I'm pretty young. The thing is, the world doesn't stay static. The world changes around you. People study how you work. They pay attention to what works, what doesn't. They develop new techniques because they're trying to beat you. We're going to be the automation company. That means AI is going to be priorities 1, 2, and 3 for the foreseeable future.
Hello and welcome to Between Two COOs. I'm your host, Michael Koenig, and today I'm joined by Wade Foster, co-founder and CEO of Zapier. Wade has been building the same company for 14 years, and that alone makes him an outlier. Most tech startups don't make it past year 5, and fewer still grow into a multi-billion-dollar business and have taken as little funding as Zapier has. And even fewer do it without losing their identity along the way. Zapier is best known as the workflow automation layer behind modern work. Millions of people use it to connect thousands of tools, and those workflows now power billions of actions every month. But what interests me most isn't just what Zapier does, it's how the company has managed to last. Over the years, Wade has led Zapier through multiple technology waves, market shifts, and internal evolutions. AI is the latest one, and a big one. But it's not the first stress test. What makes this conversation interesting is how durable companies absorb change without thrashing, breaking trust, or losing coherence. So this isn't a conversation necessarily about hype or tools or predictions. It's about what Wade has learned by staying in the seat for 14 years, what had to change along the way, what didn't, and how that shows up today in the way that Zapier thinks about workflows, automation, and AI. Wade, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
At what point did you stop feeling like there were startup problems and start feeling like a long-term stewardship problem had to be addressed?
Well, I'm not sure I've ever felt like the startup problems disappeared. We're still as hungry as ever for, making the product better, getting new customers, like that. I don't know that ever goes away. Something clicked for me, maybe in the pandemic, partially food. Maybe it was because I started having kids. I'm not sure. Where I started to think about decisions over a much longer time horizon and saying, I'll tell you another thing that helped. I'm a huge fan of this podcast, Acquired. I don't know if you listen to these guys.
Yeah, fabulous.
And so you just started listening to those episodes, and they do deep dives on just these enduring businesses. And there's just some common themes around how principled those companies are run. And, I think I was always maybe predisposed to thinking that way when most people are just so unwilling to do so. They're trying to make a quick buck. They're trying to flip the thing. They get tired. They get bored. They get distracted. There's just a lot of things that cause people to not go long. And, I sort of looked at where I was at and thinking, we're in a really unique spot because I started the company when I was 24. 14 years in, I still feel like I'm pretty young. And another 14 years that's not insane. That's kind of normal. And it felt like we ought to start looking at certain decisions and thinking about it that way. I can give you a really concrete one. We made a big pricing and packaging change in January of 2024. Very customer friendly. We gave tons of revenue back to our customers because we just sort of looked at it and said, if we keep going about this the way we're going, maybe we make more money in the short term. But over the next decade, I felt like it would compound a lot better if we gave a lot more value to our customers. We'd earn more market share, and 10 years out from now, we'd be in a better shape. Maybe the next 2 years might not look as good, but I was okay with that because I'm making a decision for 10 years down the line.
Before we get into it, follow Between Two COOs in your podcast app right now, so every episode lands in your feed when they drop. The next few are worth catching. We've got the former chief operating officer of Grindr, who took the company public at a $6 billion valuation. Then we have the chief operating officer of Cowboy Space, who's building data centers in space and the rockets to get them there. And we also have the COO of Katana, the platform behind more than $3 billion in transactions for SMBs selling physical goods. These are real operators building incredible companies, talking about how they actually run things. Hit follow so you don't miss them. I love that. And I'm curious, you've made a lot of decisions, and maybe my funding information is incorrect, but you have not raised significant venture capital.
Yeah, we did. We went through YC, and then post YC, we raised $1 million in change seed round, and that's the only primary capital that's been raised.
Which is absolutely crazy. And so there's a lot of control still that you and your co-founder have, I imagine. How much of that longer term thinking do you think is a result of having that ability to not necessarily optimize for the next 2 years? Oh, I need you guys to IPO, I need you to exit, things like that. Has that played into your ability to think about having an enduring company?
I mean, I think it has. Obviously there's plenty of venture-backed companies, even public companies, that have been able to think long-term. But I also know tons of peers that are in positions where they're having to make short-term decisions. They're trying to get the next quarter. They're trying to get to the next fundraising mile. They're trying to get to certain things. And you can see them struggling with, certain product decisions or certain sales or marketing decisions or certain pricing and packaging. Pricing and packaging is always one of these. We were like, I can make more money just by raising prices on existing customers and doing some things that maybe don't feel crazy customer friendly, and I'll make more money. But is it going to be the right thing in the long haul? And you can see everyone struggles with that. Everyone struggles with those decisions. I mean, look, even we struggle with them, but I just think because we don't have that same, board member or venture person like breathing over our shoulders saying like, hey, you got to do it. We probably have a little more fortitude to say, hey, let's go long here.
Yeah, I love that. Now, founders often talk about those near-death moments with fundraising scares or traction cliffs. Was there ever a moment where Zapier wasn't necessarily about to die financially, but you felt like it might lose its way?
I mean, right now I think is a really interesting time, honestly. We called a code red in spring of 2023 when GPT-4 came out, in part because of the delta in improvement between 3.5 and 4 was so big, and it was only 6 months between those two releases. And so we looked at that trend line, 2 trend lines, I guess, and said, wow, if this is where the world is heading, there's an opportunity here and there's a risk here. And so we wanted to just jump on it. Called the code red, had the company, but paused everything in the company for a week, ran a hackathon and said, hey, everybody's needs to be building with these APIs. They need to be playing with these tools. They need to be understanding the art of possible here, because I think this is what the next chapter of automation looks like. And if we're going to be the automation company, that means AI is going to be, priorities 1, 2, and 3, for the foreseeable future. So that was one time where it was like, what's this going to look like? And honestly, I still think, I think we figured some things out, but I don't know that anyone is out there feeling like they figured it all out. I mean, you even look at the, all the big dogs, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the Googles of the world. It feels like they're all just passing the baton around on who's in the lead, who's doing the best stuff. One moment you think it's OpenAI, then it's Google, then it's Anthropic, and you're just like, you're not really sure who's the belle of the ball at this moment.
Yeah, so interesting. And especially, I'm sure there were signals, there were other moments within the company and building where you had all of these different tech moments happen, mobile, et cetera, really basic ones that you have weathered. What feels different because from your perspective and vantage point of having that endurance, what feels different about this?
Well, I think AI just is a new way to automate. And so it just hits at the core, mission and premise of the company in a way that, say mobile didn't as much. With the mobile wave, we were so young that it was just, it didn't much matter one way or the other. And most of the automation work we were doing was for white collar knowledge workers who were mostly sitting in front of desktop and laptops and just, logging into SaaS products and things like that. And so, mobile was there and, people did stuff, but it was just not the predominant form factor of how white collar knowledge workers were automating their day to day. Whereas with AI, this is just an entirely new way that you can deliver automation. And so that it hits at it's at our doorstep in a way that maybe some of these other shifts haven't been.
Well, with a lot of those other shifts too, you end up having to say no to a lot of things. Has there been anything that you have said no to with AI?
I mean, there's definitely things that we haven't done. I think our philosophy at the outset of this was try everything. Like,
Yeah.
we actually don't know, like, there's so much to learn. There's so much to figure out. People can build stuff so quickly now. And, I think that I get critiqued. We get critiqued about that sometimes internally. We're like, what is the thing that actually is, going to be the one? But I do think, you're just kind of at a moment where you do need to have this experimental mindset. You do need to have this beginner's mind. And I don't feel like you're at this waypoint where it's like, we 1000% know the winner. Say no to everything else. Focus on this one thing and milk it for all it's worth. I just don't know that we're at that part of the story yet.
Yeah. And I think as I was prepping for this, I'd listened to a bunch of your podcasts, and in one you said, and I'll have to drop it in the notes or something, but you said, we still don't have God in a box yet, which I loved.
Yeah.
But you struck on something interesting, which is the workplace headspace, the growth mindset. Now, a lot of examples that we talk about come from tech companies that already live in software and workflows. A lot of our listeners aren't necessarily within tech itself. So for companies that aren't necessarily tech native, maybe older organizations, industrial companies, professional services, what's your advice for getting AI into the workplace headspace before rolling out tools or automation? Because you can't necessarily have a hackathon. What does a hackathon even mean in some of those companies?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're doing sort of white collar work, digital work, etc., AI is going to be so critical. If you're moving steel beams around, or, in the physical world, like, AI is going to be a part of that, but it's going to be more of a supporting role versus like maybe the central cast, perhaps. I still do think that, if you're in one of these organizations, you do need to be the type of leader that's figuring out what's possible with this technology. You need to put your hands on it. You need to figure it out yourself. Because if done well, I do think you can use it to disrupt old school industries. And those are, if you do that right, you can eliminate waste from that business. You can improve your margin profile. You can lower costs for customers. Like, those are all things that can disrupt your business. In fact, there's like a playbook in Silicon Valley that is like starting to pop up, which is, you take these, really smart AI pilled founders and you pair them up with a domain expertise who knows an old school industry like the back of your hand. And that founding pair can come in and create the new version of, the premier company in this old school space. And deliver it at just like a much, much better experience. And so if you're in one of those industries, like, I think you want to do that yourself instead of let somebody else go build the new company.
Now, hopping out of AI, and we're going to come back to it, but hopping out of AI, I want to return to your learnings over these last 14 years. We talk a lot about these 0 to 1 and hyper growth companies. Most of the company building, though, lives in that long middle. What problem took you the longest to realize was actually maybe stemming your growth?
So one of the things I wish we would have done sooner is that we would have focused more on mid-market enterprise. I think we had an opportunity probably 2017, 2018, where we could have been very aggressive to go chase that. And we didn't do it. We stayed kind of in our PLG roots, self-serve, much more of that like kind of consumeration of business software approach. And it took us until probably about 2020, 2021 to sort of wake up and say, oh, wow, there's like a big opportunity here. We're kind of sleeping. We're being a little dogmatic. In some ways, honestly, being chicken about like the opportunity here. Let's go get after it. And you just lost valuable time by not saying, hey, let's go get after it. So that's one that comes to mind.
That's a difficult decision and transition to make, especially when you've been doing something for so long. How do you go about changing that mindset, that behavior of, well, let's not be chicken? And just out of curiosity, why were you chicken? What was holding you back?
Well, I think there's a certain comfort in the business, I'm like, I'm good at this. It's familiar with this. Well, like maybe a good analogy would be our I don't know if you're a football fan or not, but Bill Belichick and the Patriots, right? Just iconic coach, arguably the best coach of all time. But by the time he left the Patriots, he hadn't really updated his play style. And he wasn't winning as much. And now you see him at North Carolina. Our first year. And, I think this is something that all leaders struggle with, which is that, you kind of come up in an era and there's things you're good at. And you're like, man, I know I can win this way. If I play this way, if I approach the work this way, I'm going to be excellent. I'm an N of one doing it this way. But the thing is, the world doesn't stay static. The world changes around you. And over time, people study how you work. They pay attention to what works, what doesn't. They develop new techniques, etc. because they're trying to beat you. And, if you're fortunate, like Bill Belichick, you can do that for a decade. But eventually, there's an expiration period on how you go about that work. And so, I think that's what's really important for a leader is, even when you're at the top of your game, you still got to be looking for an edge. You still got to be innovating. You still got to be thinking about what's the next act, what's the next way we stay on top, because that's how, you earn customers' loyalty over and over and over again. And, I think you asked, like, how did we learn to, maybe stop being chicken on this stuff? Honestly, it was just kind of like recognizing that fact and going, like, there is a huge opportunity out here, and, we're being comfortable. Like, why are we being comfortable? Let's go push and challenge ourselves. Let's go do something, unique and challenge like that. It's more fun to work that way. So let's get out there and do that.
Over those 14 years, you as a CEO, as an executive, you have grown and matured. I'm sure you've had incredible mentors. I'm sure you've learned a lot of things the hard way, like most of us. But, what parts of early Wade had to go away for Zapier to keep scaling?
The first one I can remember is, again, started the company when I was 24. And, young enough to think that, like, I'm smarter than everybody. But, starting a company has a way of making you realize, like, you're not that smart. Because you make so many choices, you're wrong so many times that you realize that what separates, the best is, what makes them so smart is that when they're wrong, they just change their mind so fast so that they actually seem like they're right a lot. The reason that, like, the best way to be right a lot is, one, you can just be right the first time, or two, when you're wrong, just change your mind. And if you do that, you actually are, like, right a fair amount. And so I think there was a little bit of, humbling that I had to go through to realize, okay, my job is not to be the smartest person in the room. My job is to just figure out what are the smart ideas, what are the best things, and how do you, put more arrows behind them. And so I think that was, like, one of the first things that I kind of had to go figure out and learn is just how to, just be a lot more open-minded about, what I know and what I don't know.
So it sounds like also there's a certain degree of judgment that develops over time to be able to look at those ideas that, maybe you had that weren't great, and then be able to change them and, say yes to different things. Like, that is a profound shift, though. There's a certain part of judgment that comes with knowledge and experience and allows you to, one, evaluate which ideas to pursue, but also, two, know when to recognize when something's not working. What does that look like in your world?
I think the more you do this, you have the benefit of just, like, pattern matching. Like, you've just seen a lot of different stuff. You can pull a bunch of ideas from different industries, different experiences, etc. And it gives you a sort of way of thinking about the problem in a particular way. And that can be just like a really valuable asset because you can sort of draw on that experience. But you also have to be really careful about it too, because that experience can fool you when the playing field shifts. Think about like the age of AI and you're like, well, maybe the way in which teams work is like totally different now. And so, am I running a playbook that actually is kind of dated now? And you kind of just have to, constantly like keep yourself in check on that. And that's where I do think it is helpful to still go spend time with younger founders, folks earlier in their career, and just see like what are they doing that's different than you. They may not have all the experience, but they just coming out of a different environment and a different era and a different way of working that feels obvious to them. It feels native to them. Like I think about when we started, like we were building all these like cloud integrations, and we would get quizzical looks around like, why don't you have more like on-prem integrations and like enterprise sort of stuff? And we're just like, what are you talking about? Like no one works that way. It just felt weird to us. Now, obviously we were clueless. Clearly a lot of people work that way, but it kind of just goes to show that like these young folks, like they just have a view on the world that just seems so obvious. And you're like, I want to understand that better. So anyway, I think you kind of got to figure out how to like use your experience, use your pattern matching really well, but also like continually like update your priors and get exposure to things that you may be discounting.
Before we get going, a quick note for listeners. This episode gets into a lot of the stuff I'm writing about in the Between Two COOs newsletter. The podcast is mostly me interviewing people like Wade and polling on how they think. The newsletter is where I'll add the practical layer around it, guest takeaways, operating patterns, and some of my own notes from the COO seat, especially with conversations like this, where we're talking about the long-term company building, automation, AI, and how operators decide what actually deserves attention. So go to between2coos.com or b2coo.com and subscribe. All right. One of the interesting things that we saw, and we're going to shift gears a little bit here. One of the interesting things that I saw in terms of the AI transformation, and, let's kind of buzzy word there, but nonetheless, AI sits within the chief people officer role for you now. So it's the chief people and AI officer. Tell me about that. Most of the time we see it sitting with tech. Sometimes we see it sitting with operations people. I would kind of put in there. Tell me about that decision.
Sure. So yeah, Brandon took that role for us tail end of last year. He's our chief people officer, now AI transformation as well too. But we started this journey in, again, spring of 2023. So it took us a while before we said, hey, we want to put a person in that role. Even though early on, like there were suggestions and proposals like, hey, maybe we gotta have like a centralized person who sort of helps think about all this stuff and like kind of guides the team, etc. We chose not to. And yeah, I think in hindsight, looking back on that decision, it was probably the correct one. And the reason why is I think had we named somebody like that early on, we probably would have not done as good of a job of making sure that the whole company understood that they have to figure out AI. When you name a person, it quickly becomes, oh, AI is that person's job. My job is this other stuff. And I think early on, it was so important to recognize that, like, no. All of you have to figure this stuff. We need to raise the floor for everybody. This can't be just like this person, this engineer's job, or this people person's job, or this marketer's job. It can't be that. All of your jobs is changing. And so by running hackathons, by doing show and tell, by having people come to the all hands and, again, do show off what they're building. We just built this culture where like everybody was like chipping in and getting excited about this and making stuff happen. First slowly, and then, more as the flywheel started to spin, more energy around it. Then it kind of got to a point where it was pretty clear that like everybody is like pretty stoked about this stuff. No, there's nobody who's like, we should not use AI in the company. But the problem started to be different. It was like, hey, we've got all these ideas, but some of the like bigger ideas, like they involve like org change, they involve role changes, they involve like these more complex problems. And me as an individual IC, I can't just wake up and decide like we're gonna redo how like hiring happens at the company. We're gonna redo like how the entire like customer journey works. with these tools. That's not like one person alone can't do that. And at that time, Brandon had just done such a good job of reskilling and reshaping how the people team was running and using AI. And it sort of felt obvious, like, well, we need somebody to help wrangle all the change management, all the logistics, all the like org goo around AI. We weren't having a technology problem. We were having like just, hey, there's like just an organization and operationalization of this stuff, and like, people psychology issues and things like that. Brandon's already done a great job of this with the people team. Why not just ask him to do that for everybody else? And so that's kind of how we got there, and why it made sense for us to go that way. I think if you have similar, setup as us, that could be the right choice. But if you have different problems, it might not be that your head of people should be the one doing this. It might be that there's somebody else in the company. I think every company's kind of going through their own journey on this stuff, and they have to, think through what are the bottlenecks they're facing, and how to think through how to go solve those.
I've actually seen it now within some other areas, mainly because I'm starting to see HR teams be much more experimental with different software and options that are out there versus other teams, for instance.
It kind of makes sense. Like there are like very real problems that are showing up on HR's doorstep that are directly related to AI. The most obvious is recruiting. Recruiting functions everywhere are having a heck of a time right now because they're just getting AI slop as applicants. Like so much of that stuff. And, I understand like how the situation got this way, because as a candidate, you're like just so used to like applying for jobs and not getting responses. So you're like, well, I'll just use AI to like help me apply to more jobs, increase my surface area. And so the whole system just kind of gets borked. And you're like, well, what the heck are we going to do about this? There's very real problems that are on the recruiting teams, like right front and center for them, where they're like going, we have to figure this out. This is not a luxury that we can just go figure out how to like dabble and mess around with AI. Like we have no choice but to like think through a new way to solve this problem. And so I do think that's partially why HR teams are like, getting into the game. It's like they have no choice but to get in the game.
Yeah. So interesting. Let's talk about problems to solve. How do you decide which problems actually deserve AI versus those that are better solved with just straight automation or better process design? How should operators think about that?
It's a good question. So, my learning over the last couple of years is that if you can solve the problem with plain old deterministic software, you probably should. And the reason why is you're just going to get better reliability. You're going to get lower costs, for anything that's like even remotely mission critical at all. It's probably just a better way to do things. That said, there's a lot of problems that you can't solve that way. And so that's where it gets really interesting. I think a mental model that we had, especially early on, but it's still true today, is we often just looked back at our, 10 years of running the company and said, what problems have we always faced that we've just never been able to solve? Like, we've just never been able to crack this nut. And can we solve it now? Like, is this actually possible because we have a new tool? That's been a very helpful mental model, is looking backwards. Now, as we've gone forward, you start to recognize places that kind of all over the place. You just look at how much of your workday involves working with unstructured data. And that's where AI just really thrives. You're dealing with big blobs of text, and how can you go wrangle that into a workflow, into a process? And then I often find you're starting to build out like these hybrid workflows where you've got like AI as a piece of the solution that's tied up with like deterministic software or code or something like that is like running a very particular way.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you've been very clear about workflows and I'm using agents in the marketing term sense, which is, I think
everything's an agent.
Yeah, everything's an agent right now. They're really like assistants, right? But nonetheless, I stopped fighting it. When it first started coming out, I'm like, no, that's not agentic. But in the marketing sense, because that is now the verbiage here. Where do you draw that boundary between deterministic workflows and maybe more a little bit along the agentic judgment? Where do you draw that today?
Well, yeah, I think it's like pretty obvious when you start building these tools. You've got a decision to make. In the deterministic world, if you want those decisions to be made, you have to articulate exactly the decisions. If this criteria is met, then go down this route. If this criteria is met, go down this route. If this criteria is met, go down this route. If this criteria is met, go down this route. Works when the world is constrained to a small set of forks in the road where you're like, okay, we're going to do this. But there's a lot of decisions where you're not maybe able to quickly articulate all the different forks in the road. And so when you get to that, you might say, okay, I want to put an AI step in the middle and I want to have it make the decision for which fork in the road to go down. And I'm going to give it a set of examples where I'm going to say, hey, if you see something that looks kind of like this, this, or this, I want you to go down this route. If it's more like this, this, or this, I want you to go down that route. And if it looks like this, this, or this, I actually want you to check in with me first before you decide. And that's helpful because what AI can do is it can pattern match. It can go, okay, like you didn't actually give me an example that looked like this, but based on what you told me, it very clearly should be down this route. So I'm going to send it here. Or actually it should be down this other. So very clearly should send it here. Or actually, I don't actually know. It's like kind of like both of these things. Great. I'm going to check with you. So, that's like the decision-making, tree is like a very helpful one. There's, cases where you're dealing with just like large blobs of text. That's a use case that like deterministic software like really struggles with. You're seeing more and more workflows where people will take, go look at like the last month's customer support tickets or like, and categorize them in a particular way and tag all the keywords and like summarize them by themes. And, that type of work was painstaking before. And candidly, like most people just simply didn't do it. So that's a really interesting one. If you want to go generate like emails or memos or documents or things like that, in the past, the way you would see folks generate emails is they'd be using kind of a mail merge style system. Hi, blank. It's nice seeing you today. I reached out because of blank. We've all gotten these emails. They're horrific. You like instantly archive these things. Now, if you give enough context to an AI, you can actually get it to generate an email that's pretty dang good. Now, a lot of folks still don't give it enough context, so you still get kind of AI slop style emails at the other side of it. But if you give it enough context, it's better than 80% of sales reps sending emails. I don't know, like a pretty good chunk. Right. It does a pretty good job. And those are the types of use cases, again, that were just like not really possible, or if they were, you did a very poor version of them. So to me, like a lot of the like, how do you decide when to use AI? It's just like looking at the use case in front of you, and it's like, well, there's no other way. I have to use it to do this effectively.
Right. I love that. And I do want to call out, you're very generous with those emails that you archive them instead of trash and mark as spam. I mean, that's very forgiving. And, I maybe applaud that. I'm not sure. A lot of the AI conversations that we talk about today, and you started getting into this, are mostly focused around capability and very few focus on reliability. What does, at this point, reliable enough actually mean when AI is embedded into a real workflow?
It depends on the use case.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day. I don't think AI has really changed the calculus on this at the end of the day. It's just a different tool to go solve the problem. Let's pick customer support. This is an area where a lot of people are trying to deploy AI software right now. Well, old school world, you'd have humans delivering all of the customer support, much of the customer support. And, at the end of a call, you would, or at the beginning of a call, you'd often have, this is being monitored for quality assurance purposes, right? And so somebody is like looking at all that data and like determining, okay, like, we're hitting a 95% quality threshold or 99% quality threshold. They're making determinations around like what's good enough and what's not. With an AI taking over customer support, kind of the same thing. You're trying to look at it and go like, well, are we hitting our goals? Yes or no on, these on our quality assurance for customer support. So I don't think it's actually all that different. You're just trying to look at the business problem that you're facing and say, well, did we solve the problem? And if we did, great. And if we didn't, well, the quality bar is not high enough yet. So the fact that it's AI or not AI it feels somewhat irrelevant to me around, how to think about quality. Like, at the end of the day, humans have a judgment around like what is good enough for this task. And then our job is to hit it. And how you hit it is you got to just work backwards from that and decide like, well, what role is humans playing? What role is AI playing? What role is, I don't know, some other technology playing, so on and so forth.
You just reminded me, I originally reached out to you just to let you know that I had one of the greatest customer support experiences I've ever had with your team, like hands down, period. And it was so amazing, and it was such a team effort. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna shoot Wade a note. And it was just like, hey, I just want you to know this. So don't go too far in replacing your customer support folks, because they're incredible and delivered such a great experience. What's impressing you? And this is, this question will likely not age well. But these days, what's really impressing you? I'm a fellow user. They also sponsor this podcast. Shout out to Fellow.
Yep. I love the Fellow team too. Mm-hmm.
Oh, so great. What's impressing you these days? It can be a company. It can be, a thought process. I don't know. Just something that you love.
Yeah. I mean, over the break, I think a lot of us, but certainly I got pretty deep into Claude Code, and particularly Claude Code for, less like technical tasks. And so I've got it hooked up to Zapier MCP. And I think this is going to be like a pretty important theme of 2026, where you're going to finally be able to like hook all your tools up, your calendar, your email, your Slack, your documents, your to-do lists, your call notes, etc., into an like AI system, and have it go do work for you and help you think about your day and move through your day like way more effectively. It's still too hard. There's still not enough, like, there's still too much of like a learning curve. Like that initial stair step is too high. But man, once you get over it, the experience is pretty freaking magical. And so, I think that's a big area of focus for us, especially on like the Zapier MCP side. Is like, how do we make it so it's so much easier for people to get their data, get the stuff that they've got from all these different tools into the context window of the AI, so they can go do interesting things with it.
Hopping back into, and I know I've kind of bobbed and weaved with this interview here, but hopping back into Zapier, have you guys ever had a COO?
No.
I know. Tell me about that. How does Zapier run? What is the operating system, and how are you running an 850 person multi-billion dollar company without having sort of that connective tissue role, I would say?
So again, here's maybe, it's not that I wouldn't like a COO. I think, the sort of value prop on paper is pretty awesome. I think every CEO sort of wakes up and they're like, wouldn't it be great if I could have this other person who takes like at least half, maybe more of my work, does it better than I do, and is also the parts I really don't like to do. Right? I'm like, who wouldn't want that? That sounds incredible. I watched over, like the 2010s, a lot of my peer set, try to hire in these COOs. I'd say most were like not crazy successful with it. Some were, but most I'd say probably weren't. And, we had points in time where I was like trying to like groom somebody or like push that direction, and it never quite panned out that way. As I reflect back on that, here's what I think makes that COO job really challenging is, one, there's no job definition for what a COO does. Just doesn't exist. The best job definition I have ever heard is that you're the opposite of the CEO. The CEO wants to do this. Okay, great. You got to do that. And like, you just divvy the org up that way. And like, that's kind of how a COO sort of comes to be. And that's the best definition I've heard, where I'm just like, yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. You're sort of co-running the company. One person has one half, the other has the other, and you're kind of, making magic happen based on each other's strengths and weaknesses. So by definition, the CEO, there is no like one set of skills you got to go build to be a great COO. The second thing I think that makes it challenging is that oftentimes when folks start to look for this person, they're like in desperate need of help. They're like, oh, I really could use this. I'm getting tired. I'm getting burnt out. I'm getting stretched thin. Company's growing a lot. And then they plop this person from the outside into this role. And now look, a lot of folks, executives, hiring is just fraught. Like, there's industry stats you'll see. I think like I think maybe it was in Hard Thing About Hard Things, or maybe High Growth Handbook. I don't know. But like, it's pretty common knowledge that like exec hiring is a coin flip, 50-50 on it's going to work out or not. So you've already got that running against you, is that external hiring is fraud. But then you've also got the fact that you're being tossed into a company and you're being asked to learn all of these different functions on day one. So if you're, maybe if you're a go-to-market focused COO, you're just like, okay, great. I got to learn, pre-sales, post-sales, customer support, marketing. Like there's just like a lot of different things all at once. And it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be amazing at all of those very quickly. So it just makes it really, really tricky. When I think about this for myself, the other way I've reflected on it, as I've watched, certain execs come into Zapier and be successful and others maybe struggle, is that I've sort of tried to step back and ask myself, how could somebody be amazing in one situation and then come into an organization, a new organization, and not? Clearly, this is not only about that person's skills, because they clearly have skills to be successful in some arena. Why is this arena different? And I've kind of tried to put that mirror on myself, where I've said, okay, I am maybe arguably the best CEO that Zapier could have at this moment in time. Let's just assume that that's true for a second. May not be.
Let's
true.
Assume it's Come true. On, we don't need to assume.
But if I were to be hired as a CEO at another company, would I be successful? And when I think about that, I kind of step back and I go, I actually don't know if I would be. Like, I think what makes me particularly good at this is one of the founders. I was there at the beginning. I know where all the bodies are buried. I know the customer problems inside and out. I know the product inside and out. There's just so much accumulation of knowledge that I have. And I've done a decent of job, like, of learning how to be a CEO sort of along the way. And as a result, that accumulation of all that contextual knowledge makes me pretty darn good at this. But if you dropped me into another world, I have none of that context. I have none of that understanding. And so the likelihood I'm going to be successful is probably much, much lower than if I just stayed in this role. And so that phenomena, I think, makes it really difficult to like hire a COO and plop them into an organization and have them be successful. So as I think about that, I'm going to close the loop on this here. You asked sort of like why Zapier hasn't. It's not because, we didn't want it. I think just stepping back, we are a weird enough company. We have a like very complex business. I think the practical learning I have is that if I am going to get someone into that role, it's because they joined us as a, an IC or a director or a VP, and then like over time they just learned the business, and then they learned the next part of the business, and then they learned the next part of the business, and it's just gotten to a point where I'm like, great, go solve the next thing, go solve the next thing, go solve the next thing. And I think that's like, when Zapier names a COO, like I think it's pretty likely that it's going to look like that, versus just like give me generic smart person who's just worked at a bunch of smart things out in the world.
Yeah, there's no right answer. And it has, to your point, the COO CEO relationship and the complementary style of it. Think of your Eisenhower matrix, the things you hate doing and suck at, right?
Yep.
That relationship is so essential. And for Zapier, because you, Wade, have thought about, this is how I think someone would be successful in this role for this company. I mean, that is going to have to be it. Unless, you wake up someday and you're just like, well, maybe that's not the case. But because it is so tied to who you are, how you think, how you work, what you want the company to be, it's essential. So you have to have someone within the company.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great. Look
mean,
how much we just.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think you see these like pairings, these duos, like throughout history
Yeah.
as well too. Like you look at MJ and Pippen, like they were phenomenal together, and I think they made each other work. The flip side is you could look at like Kobe and Shaq, and like they were clearly phenomenal together, but there was not enough room for the egos to sort of pull that partnership off for longer. And so, it's not enough to just be talented. It's not enough to just be like very skilled and complementary. The chemistry matters too. It's like, do you want to just keep working with this person? Do you want to just spend so much time with them to do this together? And that matters just as much.
Yeah, I've been blessed to have that relationship twice in my career, and it really is a fun moment where you kind of mind meld and have that implicit trust with this person that they're going to do it. I actually don't even need to say it.
Yeah,
because I
awesome
know
feeling.
they're on it. It is such a great feeling, and so much of it is relationships as well. I mean, business would be easy if it weren't for people.
Yeah.
Well, Wade, time for my last and favorite question, and I know we're a little bit over time, so I do appreciate you hanging on there. We've all had our moments in the seat where just something nuts comes up, and we just think like, I never thought I'd see that. Is there one you can share with us? And so often you can't share them. So is there one that you can share?
Well, there's a bunch of nutso stuff that you obviously can't talk about, but I'll give you one that like kind of surprised and delighted me. Folks often ask me, what's the most like surprising Zap or surprising automation or something like this that you've seen built? And I remember one in the very early days where my jaw literally dropped. So we were always pretty clearly a work automation platform. Like we were, integrating with all this B2B SaaS and, connecting your Salesforce and your QuickBooks and your HubSpot and your MailChimp and your Zendesk Zero, like you name it. Like that was our lane. But we have this like open developer platform where you can integrate anything. And, we didn't turn down, things that like had a consumer flair to them or anything like that. It wasn't like we were sort of philosophically opposed to it. It's just when we thought about where we were going in company, we were just very, very B2B oriented. And then there was one day I remember looking at a dashboard that was like, I don't know, it was like top usage for like new users or I don't know, something like that. And there was just like this weird outlier on there where I was like, what is that? And somebody had built an integration with EVE Online. So if you don't know what EVE Online is, it's this massive multiplayer like online role-playing game, kind of like a World of Warcraft style game.
Okay.
And it is famous for having this vibrant in-game economy. Like it's sort of known for having like the most real-world-esque like economy that exists. And in fact, I happen to have like an old high school buddy who'd gotten really into it. So I knew a little about it from him. And it turns out in that you can like, there's actually like an exchange rate from like in-game currency to like real life USD. So this person was just like super into it. And they had figured out that like if you automate certain transactions or certain things in the game, they were actually able to make like real life currency. So for them, this was a B2B endeavor. This was like a work endeavor. But it was just like one of those things where I was like whoa, I like that didn't even cross my mind that somebody might go do something like this with the platform.
I want to know that person. I want to be best friends.
Well, so here's the wild thing, right? I don't know if you're like in the last couple days, you're starting to see a lot of folks realize that engineering, it's less about writing code now, and it's more about orchestrating agents. And so you're starting to see some creative engineers that are actually building UIs on top of their agents that look a lot like these real-time strategy games. And so it's one of these things where I'm like, oh my God, there's like a full circle moment where it's like, actually maybe the like, the UI for like productivity in the future is all these nerdy games we played as kids.
I love that. Oh my gosh. That'd be incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone can figure out how to do like tabletop D&D. That'd be something.
Game over. You're addicted to work for. You think you got a work addiction now? Just wait.
Yeah. Well, Wade, this has been so much fun. I'm glad we could do this. And everyone, you can go to Zapier.com. Thank you, Wade, for coming on. What social platform are you posting to these days? Where can people find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably where I'm the most prolific, and then I'm on X as well too. So Wade Foster on both platforms, easy to find.
There you go, everyone. Well, thanks again, Wade. And thank you to you all for listening to Between Two COOs. I'm your host, Michael Koenig, and a big special thank you to Wade for joining us. Tune in next time, and until then, so long.